A few months ago, I'm out of town, which is something you were allowed to do a few months ago, and I get a late night phone call, like almost midnight. And on the other end of the line when I pick up is my wife's voice, but she's like frantic, she's out of breath. And behind her, I can hear the screech of our smoke detectors. And you can imagine like 1,000 things are running through my mind in a matter of milliseconds. But she'd already triple checked the house and there wasn't smoke anywhere, there was no fire. It wasn't the carbon monoxide alarm because that's a different alarm and that wasn't going off. So we knew that what it was probably just a fault in the electrical line, the detector, or the detector itself, which has happened before. On top of all of the noise and the panic that is involved in this is that thing is so loud, it's not just keeping our neighbors up, forget that. This is probably keeping the next zip code up at night. Now, on top of that, the problem is that those smoke detectors, the one that was actually going off was way up high in this one room where there's a vaulted ceiling. So here's what I have to do. I'm in a different state, and I have to direct my wife, Katie, outside to go get our extension ladder, which is leaning up against our home, bring that inside, set it up, and then kind of precariously climb up this thing, which she did do, only to find out when she gets to the top, as I'm on the phone with her, that she couldn't turn it off. She couldn't get this thing to stop. So of course, her nerves are frazzled. Our dog is going nuts. You know, I can hear him barking and running around in the background, and here I have to sort of calmly guide my wife as best I can to then climb down from the ladder and go outside and open up the breaker box and find the breaker that's associated with those smoke detectors so she can reset the alarm, and she did it. Now, this whole thing, the whole episode lasted a few minutes, but at the end of it, we were all exhausted. Of course we are. The question that I have as I tell that story is, how come I'm not as motivated when it comes to really life-threatening things in my life? I think that we are far less proactive with things that actually have the potential to burn up and destroy our relationships, our future relationships, burn up and destroy our businesses, our friendships, our finances, all kinds of negative impact, but we do nothing. And I think it might be because the warning signs are less obvious and the solution is much, much more difficult than flipping a breaker. Last time, I talked about how we can adapt to handle the pressure of life. We're really good at that. But there is some pressure, some burden, some weight that we all get used to carrying around, and it's actually holding us down. And our futures would be stronger if we don't adapt to carrying it, but we actually drop it all together. We stop trying to manage this stuff. And maybe as I get started today, the thing that might be weighing some of you down is some form of anger. You know, we all get angry in a moment sometimes, but there are a few of us, maybe a lot of you, and you know what it feels like to carry anger with you. And then the smallest spark, the wrong word, the wrong question asked, and then boom, you light up. Now, for some of you, it looks a lot more like sadness than it does like outburst or rage. You know, for some of you, that anger goes into overeating, overdrinking, because you need to mask or address the stress that you feel. And if you don't see this yourself, I guarantee the people who are closest to you can. Angry people are not hired as often, especially if the employer checks references, or they're not kept very long on teams. Angry people don't get to have great marriages or keep marriages. Kids can't wait to get far away from angry parents. And if all that doesn't motivate you because you are just that angry, then let me give you a selfish reason to listen to this today. Anger increases your blood pressure and your stomach acid, and over time, chronic anger makes you more susceptible to colds and arthritis. So, what can we do to drop this thing that is ripping so many of our relationships apart? I want to read a little paragraph from a letter that was written to a church in an ancient city called Ephesus. And this little paragraph is going to give us so much hope today, especially if we're carrying some anger. Because here is a man writing this letter who has admittedly had anger issues, but has also found a way through them, a way to drop them. The man writing this letter writes it from prison. You know, not his mani-pedi, not from the after party, from prison. And he says in this letter that there is a way to get anger out of your heart. You and I don't have to carry it any longer. And here's how the paragraph starts. Be angry, and yet do not sin. I love that because what Paul, the author of this letter, is saying is that you should be angry sometimes if you care about anything or if you pay attention at all, but you don't have to sin. That's the word he uses. You could understand that to mean you don't have to cause harm. So how do we avoid that? Well, he goes on to say, well, do not let the sun go down on your anger, which some of us have heard as marriage advice. A good idea most of the time, but let's just face it, sometimes that you're going to go all night and never resolve the tension that you have. So look closely at what he says. He says, don't let the sun go down, not on the disagreement, but on your anger. Even, listen, without resolving the disagreement. Wow. Here's the point. Don't let anger, even though you should be angry sometimes, don't let it stick around too long. Because why? Well, in the next sentence, he says, anger gives a foothold to the devil. And literally, accuser is the word that the original Greek word meant. Paul's nickname for the devil was accuser. Now, I believe in the devil because Jesus believed in the devil. You don't have to understand this idea. If anger could talk, right, it would be an accuser. Anger would be saying, you owe me. That's what I imagine the voice of anger sounds like inside. Anger is accusing. You owe me. He owes me. She owes me. And then every time you're hurt or offended or stepped over, there's this sense that somebody took something, that somebody owes you something. They tarnished your reputation. They cost you money. They took the dream life that you were building towards. You know, God should have provided for you. You should have gotten the job that you deserve. But it's not always that obvious, though. Sometimes the accusing tone of anger is on behalf of somebody else. You know, my wife actually admits that anger sometimes comes up for her because she wants the best for somebody that they don't want for themselves. I have this friend of mine who seems really chill, but underneath the surface, he is seething with anger at his dad, who is basically a couch potato. He's lost all respect for a man that he should be looking up to. That kind of anger is saying, you owe me because you're wasting the life of someone I love. And every time we let anger hang out in our lives, it opens up an account with a debt to be paid. You owe me. Now, if that debt stays on the account in your life and in your heart, it gains interest. We know this, right? That anger left unaddressed, it starts to change your personality. You know, maybe you become somebody who's cranky or irritable, or you become a blamer. You, they. And when that starts to happen to us, what Paul is telling us is the accuser is gaining a foothold in our lives. That's why the real danger of carrying this anger from sunset to sunrise, from one season to the next, from childhood to adulthood, from singlehood into marriage, from your first marriage into your second, from 2020 to 2021, is that the accuser starts to become more of your personality. And then the past anger is brought into present tension, right? Then the people who represent past debts end up paying a bill for something that they didn't take and they couldn't possibly repay. I mean, come on, some of you, your kids are paying for your childhood. Your job is paying for the rejection you experienced in your last job. Some of you, every man is paying for what one man took. So, Paul, what advice do you have for us to change course, to unload this weight? Well, it's easy. He says in verse 31, get rid of it. Just get rid of it. Get rid of all bitterness and rage and anger and brawling and slander, along with every form of malice that you have towards your fellow human. Just get rid of your cynicism. Get rid of that revenge you're fantasizing about. Get rid of the snide comments when their name comes up. Get rid of it. And you should ask the question, well, how do I just get rid of it? How do I drop this weight? It's instinct at this point. Well, here's where Paul coaches us first, to just be kind and compassionate to one another. If you want to get rid of these things, proactively be kind and compassionate to one another. He's not saying you could just pray this anger away. He's not saying time is just going to heal it, because it doesn't. What Paul is saying is that it's going to take decisions. We say around here a lot, choices actually create change. Keep the commentary to yourself. Do something for this person's benefit without strings attached. And I know you're probably objecting to this internally, especially if somebody who owes you something comes to mind. You're like, wait. What if this person has something coming to them? And I'm not talking about good things. Don't worry. If that's what you're hanging on to, it gets even worse. In the next sentence, Paul says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other. Now, I'm sure that my heart would break from your story. But if you don't want what they did to you or what they took from you to haunt your future and damage your future opportunities and relationships, forgive. And forgiveness simply means you don't owe me. Yeah, you should have come to my graduation. Yeah, you should have told me the truth. Yeah, you should have kept the promises that you made at the altar. But I've decided something today. You don't owe me anymore. Debt canceled. And trust me, it's the only thing that will break the power of anger in your life. Now, if you still want to say it's not fair, Paul gives us some context here, at least for Jesus people. Be kind and compassionate to one another, he says, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. So what Paul is saying here, just to make it clear, I want you to forgive. If you want anger to be out of your life, you must forgive like God forgave you. And how was that? Well, God decided to send his son who had no part in your sin. You had an open account with God, whether you know it or not, and it was not in your favor. And you know what God said? You know what? She can't pay me back, and I don't expect her to. So I'm just going to close the account. Forgiven, not guilty. You don't owe me. So the only final solution to anger, the way to kill it, is to love and forgive people who don't deserve it and may never change. And how are you supposed to do this? Well, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are empowered by someone who loved people who don't deserve it and may never change. And hey, everybody listening, you realize that no matter what they took from you, and no matter how hard they try and how, humiliatingly they grovel, they can't pay you back for this, right? Like if your husband left you and you had to raise the kids on your own and he came back after years and said, I am so sorry, how can I make it up to you? Well, I suppose you can't. That employee that stole, or the friend that maligned you behind your back, or the church leader who embarrassed you, if they groveled their way back to you and said, how could I ever repay you? Well, you can't. So then, how about this? Even before any groveling, even before they change or get caught, why don't you just close the account? Not because it changes the past, not because it changes what they did, not because it changes healthy boundaries that you need to set up between you and that person going forward, but because it is the one thing that finally breaks the power of anger in your life. So listen, you can try and keep playing fair, or you can be free. So, as I close today, let me give you 4 steps, because I want to be as helpful as I possibly can be. 4 steps to drop the weight of anger. Debt canceled, moving on. You don't owe me. Number 1, name it. That's right. Just be honest with yourself. Is it anger that's actually weighing you down this year or holding you back? Name it. Number 2, identify who made you angry. I know you might think it's an institution or a system, and there may be challenges there for sure, but typically anger is targeted at a person. I'm going to give you a head start. This is probably going to start with people closest to you, people that you expected more from. My spouse or my kids or my girlfriend. If only they had done this. If only they hadn't taken this. But maybe beyond that, if you're willing, zoom out a year, maybe a decade. Maybe this anger has been your MO for so long, you've been adapting to this weight for so long that you've actually lost track of the very first entry in the ledger. So it might be kind of oblique at first. It might be the church, it might be a race of people, a class of people, women, men, the government. But every single time, anger has sprung from a name, maybe two. So try to find the name of the earliest entry you can remember on that ledger. And you might need some help uncovering that for sure. Okay, number 3, identify explicitly what it is you believe they owe you. What is it? What did they take? What did you used to have that you don't anymore and it's their fault? Now this also could take a while. Take your time with it, write it down. And finally, fourth step that I suggest, practice canceling that debt. You could ritualize it, something I've tried before, creating an unforgettable moment. There was this one time that I actually wrote a letter to someone who had betrayed me. And I outlined all of this, wrote it out in explicit detail on this letter, and then I burned it. I burned the letter. It didn't solve it once and for all, but it was an unforgettable moment that for me continues to remind me that this is my posture towards someone who owes me. The real power, whatever you decide to do, is in the practice. It's in the choice. It's in your ongoing habits moving forward. So from this point onward, when that anger comes up and you want to lash out, and you'd have every reason to, and you want to combust, right? You want to make a remark, or you want to add your insults to their injuries. You want to celebrate their failure. You want to take it out on your new relationships. Then choose in that moment over and over again to say, they don't owe me anymore. And let me ask you, will you do it? Will you? You might feel like doing it right now because unloading anger feels like a great idea. But as I said, choices create change. So, are you really willing to have a different 2021 than past years? Are you ready to break the record of anger in your life? You have the chance right now to start. And I know it's going to feel really forced at first, but keep it up. And there will come a day, I promise you, when you hear their name come up, or you see them online, or maybe somebody tries to engage you in an argument, and you'll just feel differently. And you won't realize it, but honestly, you'll be able to say in that moment, that anger, I dropped it. Hey, we truly hope that this has helped you better prepare for the year ahead, but there might be more that's holding you back or holding you down. Like, for instance, do you want to spend less time this next year looking sideways at how other people are performing? Do you really live like other people's bodies or other people's careers or relationships or success have a lot to do with where God wants to take you in your life? We don't want you to live with that lie anymore, that baggage anymore. Then let's take a few moments to just talk about how we drop the weight of jealousy and comparison once and for all, because it is weighing so many of us down. We'll see you next time to do that. Like and subscribe to this channel, hit that little bell icon so you don't miss anything, and while you're at it, help somebody else. Share this right now with your network, and I guarantee somebody in your life wants to feel a little more weightless this year. Thanks.